The San Jose Sharks hang on in epic fashion, going ahead late with a William Eklund goal and beat the Winnipeg Jets 2-1. We'll talk about that and a little bit more after this. But first, if you want to be a part of the show and join the conversation, chat with us and fellow Sharks fans on the social media page or the app. Check us out on the YouTube chat, on the X Machine, Instagram, Facebook, Threads, Reddit, Discord, and of course all the shenanigans happening at the TikToks. Find all of that and more at tealtownusa.com. And come support the pod over at Venmo at tealtownusa. And it really helps us out. And again, it goes to the Get Puck Guy New Internet Fund. Let's see if we can entice Xfinity with a little bit of a cold hard cash to get him some new internet going on. Well, I'm happy to be joined by Mark Eisenberg. Mark, how are you doing this evening, or late evening for you?
I'm doing great. It's been a long time since we've done a pod together.
It has. It has been a while. And again, dude, it's good to see you.
You as well. You as well.
So, I mean, we went into this season. We kind of knew what the expectations were. You've seen where the team is at and kind of where it has kind of evolved to now. What are your just wide brush thoughts with how the team is playing now versus how they kind of got out of the gate?
I think they're playing fun hockey. I mean, that's the first thing I noticed. Like, I'm actually enjoying watching Sharks games. It doesn't feel hopeless going into a game. I actually have confidence in these guys to put in the effort to battle for each other, and even if they fall behind, battle back now based on what we've seen on that recent road trip. But I think you can see that multiple lines are now producing with the team. Certain players have found their game. And I think, at least from an offensive perspective, the Sharks are definitely lengths ahead of where they were at the start of the season. Defensively, I mean, tonight, good effort. Tonight only gave up a goal. Despite all the wins and the great comebacks we've seen, they have been giving up a lot of goals still, but I feel like that's kind of expected with the defensive unit that we have. But overall, I mean, you have to be pleased with what we've seen from the Sharks over the last few weeks.
Yeah. And AJ, thank you so much. Appreciate you putting up the transcript from the Zoom call, so really appreciate that, and hope you're feeling better, buddy. And we're both thinking of you, so hopefully you're on the mend, and we get to hear your silky smooth radio voice coming up. But this is coming from Eklund. So much more fun, way better winning than losing, and totally appreciate it, and appreciate what Eklund has to say there, because this is a guy who, there's a lot expected from him from where he was drafted, right? And there's a lot of growth that he needs to add to his game, and we continue to see it night in and night out, and that I think that's the real enjoyable part of this portion of the rebuild, is that you get to see the players kind of grow in front of your eyes and kind of mature and kind of take on more responsibilities, whether that's in the defensive zone or heck, even just tracking back on the way in which they or keep stick on the ice when they track backwards, or if they're some work on skating backwards, some work on really trying to excel at stick checking. So, we can start to see the evolution in his game now. It's not perfect, right? He took a couple of penalties this evening, and we'd like to see that kind of cleaned up in his game. But you can definitely see the 200-foot game starting to really grow and take hold with him. What are you seeing from Eki, Mark, that's kind of making him more of a complete player right now?
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, the one thing that is always fun about rebuilds, especially if you're like really following prospects from the time they're drafted, is you get to see these players kind of, grow into a professional. Eklund, we all know the talent's there, right? We've seen him since day one in camp, pulling spinoramas, the dangles, the great moves. But to last in the NHL, right, you have to develop a full game. And I think we are seeing that. You called out the penalties, which I think to make it even worse, one was in the neutral zone and the other was in the offensive zone. It's just, Quinn's going to have a conversation with him about that later on. But I think what we are seeing is, though, more consistent production in the offensive zone, which is 100% what we're looking for from Eklund. He's actually impacting the game consistently. I'd say every game now that he's on the ice. Whereas before, he'd have his spurts, he'd look really good here, then he might take a night off. But I really like what I'm seeing from him. I don't have any like crazy expectations from him this year of being some sort of like 30 goal, 70-point player immediately. But you definitely can see the talents there to grow and become possibly a permanent top line forward.
Yeah, no, I think we're starting to see that evolution, just kind of before our eyes. And so correction, AJ is in the chat. So if you guys want to throw some love to AJ, I'm sure he would really appreciate it. But Puck Guy is running the account tonight and getting the after game quotes. So really appreciate that, Puck Guy. And so again, kind of Eklund, just continuing to echo the sentiment. Everyone's playing for each other, seeing Granny, Cunny, and Mario block shots. It's so much fun to be a part of this team. And again, like you had kind of mentioned, just good to have the team have fun. Good to see the team having fun. Good to see the team out of the doldrums. And quickly before I get sidetracked anymore, Jerry F super chat, thank you so much. I'm celebrating another Sharks win with my son tonight. Great. Awesome. We say hello to your son, Jerry, and thanks for the great coverage. Well, we appreciate you, buddy. Thank you for being a great audience member and participant, because we can't do this without you. And so again, we really appreciate that. But kind of getting into the game, first off, in that first period, the Sharks and the Jets, really kind of a tale of the Sharks just bringing it, kind of from the puck drop, really initiating their presence within the offensive zone. You had a lot of zone time, a lot of possession, and quite frankly, a lot of shots on goal. I mean, it ended up being 15-15 at the end, but in that first, the first 10 to 12 minutes of that period, it was just completely dominated by the Sharks, and the Sharks would eventually cash in on Justin Bailey's first of the year, first as a Shark, first since 2018, I believe, was the graphic that was popped up. But he would get in on the scoring with Mike Hoffman and Jan Ruda getting the assists. So again, good to see Justin Bailey get that, and really, the guy that's put in so much work, to see it kind of being rewarded. It's one of those moments that you got to savor as a Sharks fan, because again, there's not a lot of great moments right now for this team, but that's one of them. And I guess, Mark, I guess when I'm talking about I guess another tidbit that I saw come across on the graphics package this evening was the Sharks have 64 players that have scored goals since the 2020 season, and it's the most in that span besides Chicago. Chicago, I believe, had 63 and the Sharks had 64, or we had 63 and they had 64. And it just kind of goes to show you how many players that they're cycling through. When do you see if a guy is just a guy versus a guy who you should bet on? Because right now, from what I'm seeing from Justin's game, I really like the player that I'm seeing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good question. Like in these rebuild years, you tend to get exposed to a lot more of these type of players who are kind of like journeyman players. They have abundance of experience down in the AHL, and they've kind of like jumped between the NHL and the AHL. And I think that's sometimes some of the enjoyment too, because you tend to root for these guys because they're playing their heart out too. Like they may not have the raw talent of some of these other guys we're referring to, like an Eklund or a Granlund or some of these other guys, but they've been battling. And when you battle for years in the AHL and you're doing well, you sometimes get rewarded. I'd say right now that's what's happening with Bailey, and it's actually fun to watch. I mean, that guy's got jets. He can fly out there, which is something I did not know about him before this stint with him in the NHL. So I think he's actually been a really decent player since he's made the jump up. I think he's got 4 or 5 points. That was a really nice goal he scored tonight, and I think he's very noticeable most of the times when he's on the ice, whether it's via his speed, his physicality, and even he's got decent puck skills. So, I mean, I don't think he's got any sort of like top 6 future with the Sharks. Like, we're not talking that. But in terms of enjoying what he's bringing right now for this period of time, I like it. I like what I'm seeing from him. And that's, again, those kind of guys, you have to root for them when you see them. It's a good story.
Yeah, and I mean, like, you bring up a good point. Not all the players that you bring in have to be, perennial all-stars, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
Justin Bailey to me could be a guy that would be a nice little asset on a fourth line if you wanted to have him as a skill player, or a guy who's not afraid to use the body, because he was making some good body checks out there tonight too. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, again, just we kind of see these players get cycled through, and it's just one of the questions that I've always kind of had in the back of my mind is when do you move off a player and when do you kind of keep a player that kind of has gotten cycled through, right? Because obviously there's a reason why he's gotten cycled through, but again, when he's been with the Sharks, he's made the most of his appearances, so that's what I like seeing from him. Quickly to end up that first period, Brendan Dillon would float just what can only be considered a duck fart to the net, and honestly, I don't really know how that one snuck in. Top corner, and again, they would end up getting a goal. They actually could have gotten more than just one goal in that final. That final 8 minutes of the first period, because quite frankly, as much as the ice was tilted in the first 12 minutes, it was completely tilted the other way in the last 8 minutes. And again, good on Blackwood for putting in a sneaky good night tonight. I mean, it would end up having a .973 save percentage for the evening, but really kept them in that latter half of the first period. And I don't know what you saw out of that goal, Mark, but it was not a thing of beauty.
Yeah, it's fluky, and if that's the only goal Blackwood gives up all night, you have to be happy with his performance. There's not much he can do about that. It floats into the net, nothing could do there really. But like you mentioned, I think Blackwood, it was a sneaky good game, just because I don't think he had quite maybe the crazy acrobatic saves we've seen from him at times this year. He did have a few, but he was just constantly in the right position, making the saves he needed, retaining the puck when necessary. And, you can't really say more than a goalie who has, 35 plus saves and only one goal against in a game. So, yeah,
he was
stellar
36 of 37.
Him.
Yeah, 36 of 37 was his statistic ending up being tonight. And it's one of those tales. It's like when you have the goalie, it makes things get easier. When you don't have the goalie, things are completely exponentially more difficult. So again, I think we'll see if Blackwood is a little long-term solution. I think right now anything is up in the air. As he could be a guy in which you try to re-sign. He could be a guy you try to get assets for. At this point, if you're not named Hurdle or Eklund, I think that we should be listening. And that goes for pretty much everybody on the roster. Outside of those two, maybe an Addison or a Hutiuk or Thrun, but besides the young kids, I mean, I would love to see the team start to really convert some of these assets into futures. I don't know about you, Mark, but that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, I think that's actually kind of an interesting conversation at this point because coming into the season, I mean, that's how you were analyzing the Carlson trade, right? You're thinking, okay, is it just the first rounder or, can Granlund turn into another pick? Same thing with like Hoffman and then even the signing of Duclair. But at the same time, I'm starting to like some of these players. Like they're playing well. Like you watch Granlund, and it's like this is the exact kind of player I've wanted the Sharks to have for a while. A guy with a lot of skill and talent who just makes the game fun to watch. So I think you put it exactly right. You have to listen, and if the right offer comes around, I think you pounce on it. Because in reality, most of these guys probably won't be there the next time the Sharks are competing for a cup. But that being said, I think, you don't just send them away for nothing. I mean, their cap hits are not huge. I think Granlund's around in the 5 million range. Hoffman's not more than that. I don't remember what he is either. But these are not guys that are breaking the bank, and we're gonna have a ton of cap space coming off. So I think you listen, especially around play deadline time when teams are looking to fill in their playoff rosters. A guy like Granlund Hoffman could slot into someone's top six. So a first or a second round pick could be dangled. And I think at that point, you have to evaluate whether you really think they're part of the long term. But Blackwood is a different conversation because he's still not old, and goalies, they're tricky. So, yeah, if someone comes with a first rounder, sure. Yeah, but I'm not going to give him away for, a bundle of mid round picks.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, we say that, and I think the Timo Meyer trade was kind of maligned in the moment. But now, with a little bit of hindsight, and we're getting to see what each of these players are bringing. I mean, Zetterlund to me looks kind of like a little bit of a young Timo. Maybe not as much, upside and potential as Timo did because where Timo was drafted and just kind of some of the physical tools that Timo has. But I look at the defenseman that they got back, and I'm pleasantly surprised, and so maybe it is more of a let's take multiple stabs or multiple attempts at the craps table and see what we get versus always trying to hit a home run dependent upon where they're at in the draft order. So it's kind of interesting. We're kind of seeing a little bit of a different philosophy where I think Doug Wilson was more of a quality over quantity. I think we're starting to see that Greer is a little bit more of a quantity over quality type GM, which, I mean, look, it's a different direction, a different philosophy, but we're starting to see some of those fruits kind of be bore because of this change in approach. So again, kind of interesting, but one guy in which we do think is part of the long term, and he kind of had it on display tonight. There wasn't any second period scoring, and quite frankly, it was pretty dull. I mean, it was 13 shots in favor of Winnipeg and 10 shots in favor of San Jose. It wasn't as quick paced action as it was in the first. I think the second was a little bit more of a slogging type event. But in that third period, at the 15:09 mark, the Sharks would go on the power play, and William Eklund with just a beautiful snapshot across the circle, right above the dots, and it was just really kind of nice one-timing snapshot, and that's the kind of goal in which you want to see that kind of player pot. And I don't know, like we kind of opened up with Eklund. We wondered about where he was at the beginning of the season so far as conditioning and so far as headspace. Like I said, I think we're starting to see the maturation right before our eyes there, Mark. What are you seeing from Eki again? Like he's just starting to find the right time to add to the game.
Yeah, I think the confidence is up. I think you see the last few games, he's putting up points. Now he's got some goals as well in there. And I think that shot shows confidence. The shot shows that he's got a decent shot, which is something we definitely speculated on before this year, having his production been down. That last season he was in Sweden, and then obviously not dominating the AHL. He still had a good season, but not dominating. So a lot of these things we were speculating really where he was in his development, and I think we're seeing game by game development there. And I'm very interested to see kind of who he's going to be. I'd probably say the second half of this year. I mean, I really like the who he's been playing with, and the impact he's been having, specifically with Hurdle, obviously. But yeah, I mean, he's exciting to watch. I think in the end, he ends up being probably on the lower end of a first line winger on a competing team, or maybe a really high end second line winger. But
He
that's
kind of
great.
reminds
Like
me
that's
of
exactly
Patrick
what we want
Marlowe's
out of
Patrick
someone
Marlowe.
like him.
Right,
Yeah.
like a Patrick Marlowe type. I think he could be a player in which you could slot him on a first line and he wouldn't look out of place. Probably more at home on a second line, either being the center or being the winger. I would probably
Yep.
be more apt to say if he's a second liner, he might be more of a center type, and if he's on the
Hmm.
first line, he'd be a winger.
Yeah.
But again, I think a guy who's got a lot of versatility. I think he's got underrated creativity, and it's got a decent set of wheels. I mean, I wouldn't say he's a burner, but I also wouldn't say like he is struggling to get out on the ice and to able to skate. I would say he's pretty efficient in his movements, but I would say we are kind of concerned that he gets physically manhandled off the puck a little bit, and then when he does start to kind of physically tire, you see him make some mistakes as far as penalty goes and trying to grasp at a player instead of letting the player kind of go. I mean, he's trying, right? He's trying to not let his mark get out in front of him, but unfortunately, when he's taking a little bit longer shifts and not realizing how much his body is taxed, he puts the team at risk, for a fresh player to take advantage of that. So I think that's one thing that'll come with time. I think that's just a veteran type of understanding of the game. But I mean, again, the growth is great, and like I said before, Mark, and I've been continually saying it after every After Dark. Try to say that 3 times fast. That I just want to see good habits be made. I want to see good habits be made. I want to see the team, correct themselves in flight. And I think we saw that on display tonight where he takes those couple of really dumb penalties. And yet, you like the fact that David Quinn's putting him out there on the power play late in the game. He doesn't see him as a defensive liability there. And two, he executes in the latter stages of the game and completely changes around the narrative of his night, right? Because if we were talking about him and the Sharks lose 2-1 and, he's taken a couple bad penalties, he's blown a couple of assignments, his whole night changes. But because he stuck with the game, he kept continued to play whether he was sat a shift or whether he was moved down a line, but you didn't see him pout. You didn't see him kind of be stuck on those penalties. You saw him have a very quick memory. You saw him be able to shake it off essentially and really be able to contribute something. So again, it's good to see the growth, and that to me is the sign that you're moving in the right direction.
Yeah. And on that note, I think a quick way to get forgiven for those mistakes is to score the game-winning goal in the final closing minutes. So I think you also could see in his demeanor during the penalties, I think he knew that he messed up. You didn't see him like yelling at a ref or anything like that. I think he knew, I took my hand off my stick or whatever. I put it on the guy's shoulder, and that's something that I have to own. And then what does he do? He kind of made it his responsibility to have an impact in the game in a positive way.
Yeah. Yeah, and just a couple quick ones. We'll go through the chat here. Hey, thank you, chat. Really appreciate all the kind words and appreciate all of the back and forth on Hurdle. I think it's a great discussion to have at Hurdle at center, or excuse me, Eklund at center. And we had the same questions about Hurdle, right? When Hurdle first started, you're like, okay, well, his faceoffs aren't that great. He doesn't have really great wheels. It seems like he's really tied at the hip with Burnsy and with Jumbo. And, what's he going to be? And then he ends up being, I think this year proves that he can be a number one center and hold that mantle up. Now, if he had some help, that would be awesome to see. But again, I think Eklund, he can work on the faceoffs. I mean, Sidney Crosby took a season, an off season to work on his faceoffs and end up, completely changing the narratives on how he takes and approaches faceoffs. I think Nate McKinnon, early on in his career, that was a big concern. And, he's a Stanley Cup winner now, and you don't worry about faceoffs with Nate McKinnon. So again, it's something that you can learn. It's what's between the eyes and what's between the ears that you can't teach with these players, right? And some of them innately kind of know where to be and innately understand the ice and the soft areas. And when I say soft areas, it's just in which the coverage is kind of depressed, or they can understand in which the defense kind of starts to sag back, and you can kind of see that and visualize, and he's got that vision. And that, to me, if you got a player that can see the ice well like that, you got a player that is mobile enough that he can be efficient in the way he moves and not struggling to move out on the ice, that's a powerful combination, especially if he's better with his hands than not. And I think Eklund is that kind of a player. And again, because of where he's drafted, there's going to be a certain level of expectation. And I don't want that interrupting his development. I think early on in the campaign, you saw it wearing on him a little bit, but I think you're absolutely right. The confidence is just building. And I think the next couple of years are going to be very interesting to see where he goes and if he can continue to manufacture this type of effort on a consistent basis.
Yeah, and also I think what we're seeing is become a little bit more of a norm in the NHL, is taking some of these young players and not giving them quite the center responsibilities right off the bat and helping them kind of grow into that role starting on the wing, because it is one of the tougher positions to play in the NHL, whereas a wing, you're kind of relieving some of those responsibilities. So I think, he definitely has that upside. He definitely, when he was drafted, was considered a guy who could play center. So we'll see kind of if that is a role for his future. But it'll be interesting to see the development. Like you mentioned, consistency is such a huge part of a young player's game, and really the difference between when these young players become like point per game players, because to be a 70, 80 point player in the NHL, you don't take many nights off, right? So I think at this point, consistency is the key, and we're starting to see that with him.
Yeah, no, I think you put it right on the nail on the head there. So I guess kind of quickly, kind of just glossing over some of the chat, they're asking, a little bit of a consensus of where is this team right now? I mean, do we see this team as building upon these good games, or do we see a team in which, okay, the team will regress back to the mean, and that mean was pretty horrible hockey? Do we think we've seen the worst of it, or do you think that there's still a lot more pain in store? I'm on the pain train. I think that eventually this high is going to wear off, but I kind of want to get your understanding a little bit, Mark, on where you think the team is at.
I definitely agree there will be pain, but I don't think there will be embarrassment like there was earlier in the season. I think the constant losing of like 10-1, 10-2, and those kind of efforts, I think hopefully those are in the past. But what I do think is realistic is kind of a blend of nights like this and some of the games from the road trip mixed in with some 5-1 losses. Like, the thing is, on paper, our forward group isn't terrible, but you still look at a defensive group, and while there's names in there that I like, and I'm seeing some really good performances recently, it's still not a team that has strong defense. So you're going to have these nights where there's probably like 5 or 6 odd man rushes, and Blackwood's just not able to save, 35, 40 shots. So I think in reality, we're still going to be bottom of the NHL, bottom 5, bottom 4. If I had to place a bet, I'd probably say bottom 2 or 3. But what I have seen here at least gives me faith that we're going to see competitive hockey, and at least effort from the team, and not just like tucking their tail and looking like an AHL club, as they did the first 10, 11 games of the season.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I mean, look, I'm just looking at the roster right now. There are definitely some pieces where I think could be had. I think, I liked Thrun's game this evening. I mean, it was pretty sheltered. It only had 13 minutes on the ice, and Caleb Addison, same thing, 13 minutes of ice time. But I liked both of their games. Ohutiuk had a little bit more at almost 16 minutes tonight. But you're looking at guys like Jan Ruda having almost 22 minutes, and Mario Ferraro almost 25 minutes, and Kyle Burrows only almost 23 minutes for Kyle Burrows. I mean, that defense leaves a lot to be desired, and I think you just look at that and you go, that's not a defense of a that's a defense of a bottom 5 team, to be completely honest. And like I said, there's a few names in there. Thrun, Addison, Ohutiuk, those I think were the guys that you kind of build around on the back end. But I think I look more at the forward side and I go, there's some nice little pieces in there, whether it's a Barabanov or a Hoffman or a Granlund or a Duclair or a Conan or a Sturm. I mean, there are some pieces in which you would be listening to if somebody came to you and said, "Hey, we want to give you a second round or a second and a third or a B-level plus kind of prospect." I think the Sharks should be listening, and I think that it should be pretty much anybody not named Hurdle and Eklund be available at the right price. Because other than that, I mean, I think, again, you're trying to still maximize assets in this point.
Yeah, I'd say we're still only a year or two into the rebuild in reality, with a few more years of trying to stockpile those draft picks. That could get expedited via winning a lottery or something like that. But for the most part, this is a slow process. And
people thought
that process.
People thought that process that process started, when in the years in which Erik Karlsson was still here and we were losing, right? People are like, oh, okay, well, so they're starting the rebuild now. It's like, no, not really. The rebuild kind of really, really got into full start mode after Karlsson's trade.
Yeah. Yeah, and a rebuild rarely starts with a number 1 pick. Like, usually a rebuild starts with like something in the 6 or 7 range, because a lot of teams just cling to thinking they're still a playoff caliber team. And then it's usually you kind of really go really for broke, and that's when you start getting those first, second, or third overall picks. And I think the Sharks are kind of right in the middle of that now. I think like this year, next year, those are the years where we're going to be looking at the 1 through 3 range, depending on how the lottery falls. And then those are the key pieces of your next generation, hopefully, mixed in with some of the other assets that you've hopefully acquired via either other mid-first round picks, someone like Musty from last year who's like a late first round pick. Like, those are the guys who are more of the complementary pieces for those, next level players in hopefully, a Celebrini or a Will Smith if he develops the right way, like those kind of guys.
For sure. Well, we've hit the half-hour mark, so I think this is about our time to start wrapping up. So in case you missed us and you want to catch us again, check us out across all of the podcasting platforms, that being on the YouTube Rewind, the podcasts from Apple, the Apple Podcast Store, Google Play Store. We've got SoundCloud, we've got Spotify, TuneIn, iHeart, and then the Odyssey app, and then always at tealtownusa.com. You can always find the podcast there. You can always find the YouTube Rewind there as well. But we really appreciate everybody checking us out this evening. And, again, we really, hearts are kind of open and all out for AJ, and hopefully making a speedy recovery. And thank you so much for joining us, AJ. And like I said, we're thinking about you, buddy, and hope you feel better. But Mark, I wanted to quickly kind of end with what are your final thoughts for the team? What kind of thought of the evening's action, and where the people can find you?
Sure. First off, echoing your statement, feel better, AJ. Definitely thinking about you there, buddy. In terms of final thoughts for the team, I'm just enjoying watching the Sharks again for the first time in years. So that's kind of a nice thing, competitive games. And, try not to think too bad about every 2 points that moves us ahead of the bottom of the standings at this point. So, you can find me, as always, at Mark SJS on Twitter, and then on some of these great After Dark game podcasts.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. And always love talking puck with you. As far as my final thoughts go, again, this is just one of those games in which you build upon. This is the kind of this is the game that you look back on. When the team is entering its stretch to go compete for a wild card spot, and you go, man, these games in which we were not good, we put up a stout effort, and we were able to get some late game heroics. This is where you draw from the experience that you're gaining right now when you're in the doldrums. So again, it's good to get those wins. I still think that the team is going to be struggling, but like you said, trying not to worry too much about the wins. But other than that, I'm seeing good habits. So that's what I'm most happy about, is just to continue good habits. As far as where you can find me, you can use my first name. That's ERIK, last name LANDI, across all of the social media garbage. And for all of us at Teal Town USA, thank you so much for checking us out. Of course, we go live after every single Sharks game. And then, of course, we have our great Pucknologist show on Sunday at 7. So come check it out. Of course, we also have great interviews, and we have editorials that go up on the website. So, again, we really appreciate everybody checking us out and coming to join our community here. So, anyhow, for everybody, we like to say keep it real, keep it teal, and keep it real, Teal. We'll catch you after the next game, and thanks again for joining us. Have a great evening.